They didn't know the quiet rookie was a Marine until armed men stormed the firehouse. One moment, he was mopping floors and taking orders from guys who'd written him off as useless. The next, he was the only thing standing between his crew and 4 armed men who'd just kicked in the side door of Station 47. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody except him. Because Marcus Reyes had spent years learning to read a room for threats before he ever learned to read a fire. And on the worst night any of them had ever seen inside those walls, the man they laughed at became the man who saved them all. The assignment sheet at Station 47 had a pattern that nobody talked about out loud, but everyone understood. The bottom of the list, the overnight gear checks, the equipment inventories, the floor scrubbing and the bay cleaning and the taking out of trash at 2 a.m, that was Marcus Reyes territory. It had been that way since his first week, and 6 months in, nothing had changed. He was the rookie, the quiet one, the one who showed up 10 minutes early to every shift, kept his head down through every meal, and said almost nothing unless he was directly addressed. Even then, his answers were short, functional, just enough words to close out a conversation without starting a new one. Lieutenant Ray Castellano had made up his mind about Marcus inside the first 2 weeks. He wasn't shy about it either. "Kid's got the enthusiasm of a potted plant," he told engineer Pete Driscoll one afternoon while Marcus was 3 rooms away cleaning the kitchen. He wasn't even trying to keep his voice down. "I don't know what the academy was thinking passing him." Pete had laughed. Not a cruel laugh exactly, just the easy agreement of a man who hadn't thought too hard about it. "He's harmless, I guess. Quiet doesn't mean useless." "Quiet means nothing's going on in there," Castellano said. Nobody disagreed. That was the thing about Station 47. It was a tight crew with years of trust built between them, and Marcus hadn't earned a single square inch of it. Not because he was incompetent on calls. He was fine on calls. Technically sound, followed orders well, didn't freeze. But fine wasn't enough to break into the circle. Fine got you floor duty and the midnight gear inventory and the kind of silence at the dinner table that made it clear there were 6 spots and you were sitting in the 7th. Marcus Reyes ate his meals, did his work, and never complained about any of it. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to ask, was why. His file, if anyone had looked at it with real attention, would have told them something, not everything. The parts that mattered had been scrubbed down to a single line. 4 years active service, honorable discharge, Marine Corps Infantry, combat action ribbon, 2 tours. The awards were understated the way the military understates things when the truth is too heavy to list cleanly. The combat action ribbon alone meant he'd been in actual firefights, not training, not simulations, real engagements where real people were trying to kill him, and he had to make decisions faster than most people form complete thoughts. But nobody at Station 47 had looked at that file with real attention. Castellano had skimmed it during onboarding, seen the service record, mentally filed it under, "Okay, vet, probably thinks he knows everything," the kind of assumption that comes from insecurity dressed up as experience, and moved on. He'd handed Marcus a mop on day 3 and never reconsidered. Marcus had said nothing. He took the mop. He took the midnight shifts. He took the jokes about being quiet and the pointed looks when he sat at the wrong end of the table. He had learned something overseas that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. The less you reveal, the more you can observe. Silence is information gathering. Stillness is preparation. Every room Marcus walked into, he cataloged without seeming to. Exits, sightlines, positions of the people around him, potential threats, not because he was paranoid, but because the training had gone deep enough that it had become automatic. Breathing in, breathing out, reading the room. He'd walked into Station 47 on his first day and spent the first week doing nothing but learning the building, where every door was, which windows opened, how fast you could get from the back hallway to the apparatus bay. He'd done it the way he did everything, quietly, without drawing attention, in the margins of the time between tasks. Nobody noticed. Nobody was looking. The night it happened was a Tuesday in November, cold enough that the bay doors had been rolled down, and the station had settled into the specific quiet of a slow shift. A structure fire earlier in the evening had wrapped up clean, no injuries, and the crew had come back to showers and a late dinner, and the kind of mild exhaustion that makes a slow night feel like a reward. Castellano was in his office doing paperwork. Pete Driscoll and firefighters Danny Chen and Alicia Ramos were in the common room watching something on television. Paramedic Janet Kowalski was in the back, restocking the rig. Marcus was in the equipment bay doing the overnight gear check, his assignment, as always, with a clipboard and a flashlight and the particular kind of focused patience that was just his way of being alive. What none of them knew, what they hadn't been told because it was above their clearance and not their problem, was that there was a man in the upper bunk of sleeping quarters B who wasn't a firefighter. His name was David Ochoa. He was 34 years old, a former accountant who had accidentally become the most important witness in a federal organized crime prosecution. He had seen something he wasn't supposed to see, told the wrong people he'd seen it, and spent the last 6 weeks living in a succession of safe houses while federal marshals figured out what to do with him. 2 nights ago, one of those safe houses had been compromised. The marshals, running out of options and time, had made a call that, in retrospect, was one of the worst decisions in the chain of bad decisions that led to this night. They'd asked the fire department for an unofficial temporary quiet arrangement. Station 47 was off the grid enough and busy enough that nobody would think to look there. The station commander had agreed. He'd told Castellano, and Castellano had decided, with characteristic arrogance, that the rest of the crew didn't need to know. Keep it clean. Keep it simple. The witness was in the back bunk. A marshal named Torres was posted outside in an unmarked car, and nobody needed to worry because nothing was going to happen. Something was going to happen. At 11:47 p.m., Marcus heard a sound. It wasn't loud. Most people wouldn't have clocked it as wrong. It was a scrape, metal on metal, brief, coming from the direction of the side access door off the north hallway, the one that the crew used to get from the sleeping quarters to the equipment bay without going through the main station. That door had a specific sound when it opened correctly, a click, then a groan from the hinges that needed oiling. This sound was different. Someone was working the lock from the outside. Someone who knew what they were doing and was trying not to make noise. Marcus set down his clipboard. His pulse, which had been 62 beats per minute, didn't change. That was the first thing combat does to you if you survive enough of it. It rewires your threat response so that the alarm doesn't ring outwardly. It rings inward, low and clear, and what it says is, cataloging situation. Stand by. He moved to the north end of the bay, staying in shadow, and positioned himself beside a storage unit where he had a sightline to the hallway without being visible from the door. 12 seconds after he heard the first sound, the door came open. 4 of them. They moved in single file, low and quiet, and Marcus had 3 pieces of information in the first 2 seconds. They were carrying weapons. He could see the profile of a handgun on the lead man and what looked like a short-barreled shotgun on the second. They weren't announcing themselves as police, which meant they weren't police, and they were moving toward the interior of the station with the kind of directional certainty that meant they knew where they were going. One thought, clean and simple, they're here for the witness. Second thought, Torres outside was already down, or they wouldn't have made it through. Third thought, Castellano's crew has no idea. He had approximately 40 seconds before they reached the common room where Driscoll, Chen, and Ramos were watching television. Less if someone came out into the hallway. He had no radio. His phone was on a charger in the bay 30 feet behind him. He had a clipboard and a flashlight and 4 years of training that had taken him to places these 4 men could not imagine. Marcus Reyes exhaled once. Then he moved. The first man through the door was the one with the handgun, and he was good. Watchful, checking angles, the kind of guy who'd done this before. He was not good enough. Marcus came out of the shadow beside the storage unit at an angle the man wasn't watching because Marcus had spent 12 seconds figuring out exactly which angle that was. The flashlight connected with the man's wrist before he could process that someone was there, and the handgun clattered across the concrete floor. One controlled movement converted into a second. Marcus's weight shifted, his forearm came up and across, and the man went down hard, his head connecting with the side of the storage unit. Not dead, out, 1 second, maybe 2. The second man reacted faster than expected. The shotgun came up. Marcus was already inside the arc of it, too close for it to be useful, and he drove his palm into the underside of the weapon, redirecting the barrel upward. The discharge went into the ceiling. The sound of it was enormous in the enclosed space, a thunderclap that would have woken the dead. The second man was strong, fought the grip, started to wrestle for control. Marcus gave him the weapon, both hands free, 3/4 of a second, and the second man was on the ground. The third and fourth had split. Good instinct, bad choice in this specific hallway, because splitting in a confined space only works if you have enough room to get around whoever's in the middle, and Marcus didn't give them room. He used the second man's dropped shotgun as a barrier, stepping over it, moving toward the inside rather than the door, which forced both of them to come at him from the front. They were faster than they expected him to be. He was faster than they expected him to be. 51 seconds after the side door had opened, all 4 men were on the ground and not getting up. Marcus stood in the hallway. He was breathing slightly harder. His left forearm had a long scrape from the shotgun barrel that was starting to sting. Otherwise, he was fine. From the common room, he could hear the television still going. Then he heard Driscoll's voice saying, "What was that? Did you hear?" And footsteps. And then the door at the end of the hallway swung open, and Pete Driscoll stood there with his mouth open, staring at 4 men on the floor, and Marcus standing in the middle of them like he'd simply always been there. "What?" Driscoll started. "Lock the common room door," Marcus said. His voice was completely level. "Get everyone in there. Call 911. Tell them you have an officer down outside and a security breach at the station, and do not open that door for anyone until you hear sirens. Go." Driscoll stared at him. Pete. Just his name. Said the way you say someone's name when there's no time to explain, and all they need to do is move. Pete moved. Castellano came out of his office into the hallway 40 seconds later and stopped so abruptly he nearly fell. He looked at the 4 men on the ground. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the 4 men again. "Reyes," he said. "Lieutenant." Marcus was already on his phone, having retrieved it from the bay. "You need to get to the witness, back sleeping quarters. If they had a 5th man who went direct, he already has a head start." He was moving as he spoke, not waiting for Castellano to process it. Castellano processed it anyway, somewhere in the back of his brain that was still running, and started moving too. The 5th man. There was a 5th man, and Marcus had calculated the probability at about 60% based on the team's formation suggesting a split-element approach, had gone around the exterior to the emergency exit on the east side. He'd gotten through the door and was in the back hallway when Marcus came around the corner from the equipment bay. He was bigger than the others and moving fast, and there was a moment where he saw Marcus and his eyes registered something. Surprise, maybe, or recognition that the situation had changed in a way nobody had briefed him on. And that moment was all Marcus needed. The 5th man hit the floor. David Ochoa was still in his bunk. He'd slept through the shotgun blast, which later became something of a legend at the station. He woke up to Marcus standing in the doorway and said very calmly, "Are we still in the safe house?" "Yes," Marcus said. "You're fine. Don't move." The next 90 minutes were sirens and federal agents and paramedics and statements, and a DEA supervisor named Whitmore who kept shaking his head and writing things down and then shaking his head again. Marshal Torres was alive. He'd been hit with something and had a concussion and 2 broken ribs, but he was alive. The 4 men in the hallway were alive. The 5th man in the back hallway was alive. Marcus sat on the bumper of Engine 47 with a bandage on his forearm and drank the coffee that Alicia Ramos had made and brought to him without saying anything, which was the most meaningful thing anyone had done for him since he'd started at the station. Castellano walked over at some point. He stood there for a second, looking at Marcus, and you could see something happening in his face, a reconfiguration, the slow and uncomfortable process of a man revising a story he'd already decided was finished. "How long?" Castellano said. Marcus looked at him. "Marines," Castellano said. "How long?" 4 years, 2 tours. "And you never said anything?" "You never asked, Lieutenant." That landed. You could see it land. Castellano sat down on the bumper next to him, which was not something Lieutenant Ray Castellano did. Sat next to people, looked like he wasn't sure what to say, held his coffee with both hands like he needed something to hold. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I made assumptions." "Yes, sir." "I made assumptions and I was wrong, and because of that I put my crew at a disadvantage they didn't know they were at. A beat. If I'd read your file properly, if I'd asked—" "It's done," Marcus said. "Your crew is fine. The witness is fine. Castellano nodded slowly. Then he said, "You were watching us this whole time?" "I watch every room I'm in," Marcus said. "That's not something I can turn off." The backstory came out gradually over the following days, the way these things do, not in one clean revelation, but in pieces, offered when Marcus was ready to offer them and not before. He had enlisted at 19, 2 months after a car accident had taken his younger brother. He'd needed something that demanded everything he had and left no room for the grief to find him in the quiet. The Marines had obliged. He'd gone through infantry training and come out the other side, shaped differently, the way things that go into fire come out harder on the molecular level. His first deployment had been to a place where the concept of a slow day did not exist, where every patrol was a calculation of risk and every return to base was a small, private gratitude. He had learned to do things fast and quietly and without announcing himself, because announcing yourself in that environment was a way of dying. The second tour was where the combat action ribbon had come from. His unit had been in a situation that the official report described in the specific, bloodless language that official reports use to describe situations that were actually catastrophic and terrifying and required human beings to do things that no amount of training fully prepares you for. Marcus had done what needed doing. 3 people were alive because of decisions he'd made in about 4 seconds, and those 4 seconds had cost him 14 months of sleep in a relationship and the general ability to be in rooms with loud, sudden noises without his nervous system registering it as incoming. He'd come home and spent some time being not okay, in the way veterans are not okay when the thing they're trained for is gone, and the thing waiting for them is a world that's moved on without them. He'd tried a few things. Construction. A security job that paid well and bored him senseless. Then a friend who'd gone the same route, infantry to civilian, had joined the fire department and said it helped. The calls, the structure, the sense of being useful in a way that mattered. So Marcus had applied, passed everything easily. Gone through the academy and said very little and come out the other side and walked into Station 47 and immediately understood in the first hour the dynamics of the room. He decided to do what he always did. Keep quiet. Learn the space. Watch. Not because he was planning anything or being strategic, but because it was the only way he knew how to enter a new environment, carefully, from the edges, earning nothing until he'd earned it. He hadn't planned for the dynamic to stay hostile long enough to matter. He'd expected to break through eventually, naturally, in the slow way that time and shared work breaks through most things. He hadn't expected to break through because 4 armed men came through a side door and he was the only person in the building who knew what to do. He hadn't expected it to go like that, but it did. The change at Station 47 was not immediate and it was not performed. It was the real kind of change, which is slower and quieter and mostly happens in the absence of ceremony. Pete Driscoll started asking Marcus's opinion on calls during debrief. Not out of obligation. Pete was not a man who did things out of obligation, but because somewhere in the recalibration of that Tuesday night, he'd realized that Marcus was watching everything. And watching everything meant seeing things, and seeing things meant that his input was worth hearing. Alicia Ramos, who had already been the least unkind of the crew, started including him in conversations. Danny Chen, who had been the most openly dismissive, took longer. But one afternoon, about 3 weeks after the incident, he stopped in the middle of the equipment bay and said, without looking up from what he was doing, "I was a jerk. I'm sorry." Marcus said, "Okay." And that was it. Castellano went furthest. He called Marcus into his office one afternoon, the same office where Marcus had never been invited to sit in 6 months, and closed the door and said that he'd had a conversation with the station commander and with some people above the station commander, and there was a possibility, if Marcus was interested, of a role being created. Something that didn't exist yet, but should. A cross-training position working with both fire departments and federal agencies on coordinated threat response. Basically, taking everything Marcus had done instinctively that night and building a protocol around it, training people, teaching situational awareness in a systematic way, making sure that if something like this ever happened at another station, or a hospital, or a school, or anywhere else first responders worked, there were people who knew what to do. Castellano slid a folder across the desk. Not an order, not an assignment, an invitation. "You don't have to," Castellano said. "You could stay on the crew exactly as is. You've earned that more than I gave you credit for. But this," he tapped the folder, "this would mean you're not just saving people in your building. You're saving people in every building." Marcus looked at the folder for a long moment. He thought about his brother, who had been 21 and full of plans. He thought about the 3 people who were alive because of 4 seconds of decision-making in a place he'd rather not name. He thought about 6 months of mopping floors in a firehouse where nobody asked his name with any real curiosity, and how none of it had felt wasted, because all of it had been preparation for something. He just hadn't known what. He picked up the folder. "Tell me more," he said. 6 months after the incident at Station 47, a program was officially launched, the kind of program that doesn't get a press release but gets a budget, which is the real measure of institutional seriousness. It was called Integrated Response Awareness Training, and its founding coordinator was a man named Marcus Reyes, who showed up to the first session with a notepad and a coffee and the same economy of movement and expression that had made people write him off as nothing for so long. There were 12 participants in the first cohort: firefighters, paramedics, 1 police liaison. Some of them had heard the story, some of them hadn't. Marcus didn't bring it up. He didn't use himself as the example, didn't play the card of "look what I did" to establish credibility. He just taught. He broke down situational awareness into component parts that people could practice. He walked them through threat assessment in a way that translated the language of combat into the language of civilian emergency response. He was patient with questions, precise with answers, and occasionally, when someone pushed back on whether this was really necessary for their job, he would stop and look at them with the particular steadiness of a man who has been in rooms where it was absolutely, unambiguously necessary, and say, "I hope you're right, and I hope you never need any of this, but if you do, you'll have it." Nobody pushed back twice. By the end of the first year, 3 other stations had sent personnel through the program. A hospital security team from the next county had requested a modified version. A federal agency that Marcus declined to name had reached out about a consulting arrangement that he accepted and also declined to discuss in any detail. He remained, in most respects, a quiet man who said what needed saying and nothing more. At Station 47, on a Tuesday night almost exactly 1 year from the night 4 armed men had come through the side door, the crew had a dinner. Nothing formal. Pete Driscoll had made something complicated with chicken, and there was a cake that Danny Chen had bought at a bakery, and slightly regretted because it was too sweet for everyone, but ate anyway out of commitment. Marcus sat at the table, in the middle. Not at the end where the extra chair was, not in the space that had been implicitly reserved for someone who wasn't fully part of things yet. In the middle. He ate dinner and talked, not a lot, but more than before, more than anyone had thought he was capable of when they'd first written him off. He talked about a call earlier in the week that had gone well. He talked about something funny that had happened in one of the training sessions. He laughed once, a real laugh, brief but genuine, at something Driscoll said that was objectively not that funny, but hit the right note at the right moment. Later, cleaning up, Alicia Ramos stood next to him at the sink and said quietly, "You know, when you first got here, I thought you were just shy." Marcus handed her a dish to dry. "I was," he said. She considered that. "And now?" He thought about it. "Now I'm shy, and people know better than to give me floor duty." She laughed. He smiled. And that was the most Marcus Reyes had volunteered about himself since the night everything changed. There's a kind of person who moves through the world in a way that makes other people uncomfortable, because their stillness looks like emptiness. Their silence reads as nothing going on. Their refusal to perform their own competence gets interpreted as an absence of it. We pass these people in hallways, assign them the worst tasks, seat them at the edges of tables, and never think to ask what they've been through or what they might be capable of. Marcus Reyes mopped floors for 6 months in a firehouse where he could have, at any point, been the most capable person in the building. Not because he was hiding exactly, because he was waiting, watching, learning the room, doing the work that was given to him without complaint, not because he didn't know his own value, but because he understood something that most people who need to be seen urgently haven't figured out yet. The moment you actually need to be seen, you will be. He was right. What he did in that hallway at Station 47 in 51 seconds was not an accident. It was not luck. It was the product of years of experience and training and loss and survival and the specific discipline of a man who had spent a very long time learning to do hard things without making noise about it. The arrogant ones got their answer. The dismissive ones got theirs. And a man who had been treated like the bottom of the roster became the reason 6 people went home that night. Sometimes the person you've assigned to mop duty is the one who saves your life. Sometimes the quiet one at the end of the table has seen things you cannot imagine. Sometimes the resume you skimmed without reading is the most important document in the room. We don't know what people are carrying. We don't know what they've been through. We don't know what they're capable of until the moment, the one that comes without warning, always, when it matters. And by then, it's too late to decide whether you should have paid attention. Pay attention earlier. Never mistake stillness for emptiness. Never mistake silence for the absence of something worth hearing. And never, ever assign someone mop duty before you know what they've survived. If Marcus Reyes's story hit something in you, if there's a part of you that has been underestimated, overlooked, given the bottom of the list when you knew you deserved more, drop a comment below. Tell us about it. Tell us about the moment, if it came, when you got to show what you were really made of. Or tell us about the moment you underestimated someone and had to reckon with being wrong. This channel exists for those stories, the real ones, the ones that stick with you. If you want more stories like this, firefighters, paramedics, military veterans, stepping into impossible moments and changing everything, subscribe. There's a new one every week, and every one of them is true to the thing that matters most. The reminder that the most extraordinary people are often the ones you walked right past. Share this with someone who's been underestimated. They'll know why.